Keeping up with what's happening in Israel as well as the after impact of that ongoing active war, as Prime Minister of Israel has declared with respect to the ongoing tensions between Israel and Palestine. We are hoping to discuss the after impact and the impact on India specifically. Joining me is Kartik Malhotra to discuss perhaps what's going to be on annual, Kartik, when it comes to what happens hereafter, as a matter of fact, not just for the two major bloc, but all the other countries that are involved, as well as India. What has India got to lose? To come to think of it, as an immediate after impact, the IMEC, the important economic corridor discussions around which came to light after G20 summit, could take a beating? The improvement
Shweta.
could take a beating?
I think, right now, any economist or any analyst who is saying that the impact of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East is going to be muted on India or on the world, I think needs to get a reality check. We've seen how Russia-Ukraine had a major impact on inflation globally. We've seen how any sort of geopolitical stress between any two major economic blocs ends up having a cascading effect on the global economy. And we've had far too many instances of war, of aggression, of violence in the last 2 years, starting with perhaps 2021 when US had pulled out of Afghanistan and Taliban had taken over. We've seen the continuous aggression on the Chinese border with India, especially on the eastern Ladakh side. We've seen the clashes of 2020 in Galwan. So anytime there is any sort of aggression between two countries, there is a cascading effect on trade, there is a cascading effect on oil, there is a cascading effect on overall bilateral and multilateral trade between countries across the world. Now, specifically India and Israel, there are three very important issues that hinge with trade with respect to India and Israel. Number one, India exports diesel and cut and polished diamonds to Israel. Israel is one of the only countries with which India actually has a trade surplus, not a trade deficit. So we have a trade surplus of almost $6 billion with Israel. The overall volume of trade between India and Israel is about $10.7 billion. Now, $10.7 billion, out of which exports are upwards of $8 billion and imports are the balance to $2.5 billion or so. Now, you mentioned the IMEC, and I think it's important to note, and maybe if we could have that map pulled up on the screen, I could just run through how strategically Israel becomes important to the IMEC, which is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. And Israel is right up there at the starting point of the northern zone, the northern part of the corridor, which connects the Middle East to Europe. And that is where Israel and the three major ports of Israel are. The first port, of course, is Haifa, which is now partly controlled by Adani. Then you also have two other ports, which is Ashdod and Eilat. All three ports are pretty much the hub of global trade between Middle East and Europe. Now, IMEC, which is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is supposed to be this, this new competitor to China's BRI, the China Belt and Road Initiative, which becomes an alternate trade route for the world to explore, where there is going to be a shipping line directly between the western coast of India running all the way to Dubai and beyond, UAE and beyond. Rail networks going all through the Middle East, eventually culminating at Israel, from where another northern corridor opens up into Europe. Now, overall, when you look at India's trade, India's exports to Israel, any sort of conflict is bound to hamper that. When you look at Europe's trade with Middle East and you look at any sort of oil import, any container movement, shipping movement, Israel becomes a central conduit to any freight movement between Middle East and Europe. So any impact on Israel is bound to create some sort of a trade havoc between Europe and on this side of the coast with India as well. Now, there are multiple other issues that emerge with this. One issue being that this aggression which is happening right now between the Hamas and Israel, now this being supported by Iran, this being supported by Hezbollah, which is in turn supported by Iran again, the ramifications of a larger divided bloc in the Middle East could in any case hamper trade between Middle East and the rest of the world. Right now, up until now, you believe that, okay, you can get your goods and services to Middle East There is going to be infrastructure, roads and rails built connecting these multiple countries in the Middle East, going up all the way to Europe. But
We'll finally
that
have
is
the map
unlikely
there.
to happen. Yeah, so let's just try and see where we have Israel. Israel is right here. So you see this point, this is Israel.
A very crucial
and
point.
there are these three ports here which I spoke about, Shweta. There is the Haifa port, there is the Ashdod port, and there is the Eilat port. All of them. So now any route, any silk route or any trade route going from India is going to enter the Middle East through UAE, followed by Saudi and other Middle Eastern countries, and there is going to be rail and road connectivity all the way to Israel. Now, if Israel ports are bombed, or if trade between Israel and the rest of the Middle East for whatever reason gets cut off, then any goods moving out of India or into India through Middle East and beyond from Israel to Europe are obviously going to get compromised. And India, Israel have this beautiful position where, as I mentioned, India has a trade surplus, not a
with
trade
Israel.
deficit. So I think we will have to watch this situation very, very closely, very, very carefully, and try and arrive at how this can be de-escalated. I'm not sure India is going to be an active participant in this ongoing conflict. Unlikely that even US or UK will be active participants. I think UN, obviously all hopes are always pinned on UN for UN to come in and de-escalate issues. But the fact that the Israeli Prime Minister has said that this is an outright war and not just a skirmish or a conflict, or even though it started as an act of terror, it is pretty much an all-out war. And there are going to be geopolitical tensions which will definitely have a larger impact on inflation, on fuel prices, on movement of goods across countries, and of course any other travel. So Air India, we know, yesterday cancelled the flight to Tel Aviv. So Air India is not flying. Unlikely that many other countries, their national carriers would also want to fly to Israel or to that region right now. So
right, and that's important because so far we know that flights to Tel Aviv have been cancelled. A lot of major carriers are not going to fly to Israel anytime soon.
Absolutely. So I think movement of people, movement of goods, the roads and railway linkages within the Middle East, and then if this conflict continues to go on, it's not just going to be Iran and Iran-backed Hezbollah which is going to be up against Israel. This matter could explode into a much larger region in the Middle East, and that will have an impact on trade within the region and the trade that region does with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. The emerging fault lines in the Middle East have now resulted in an all-out war likely to impact trade, not just in the Middle East, but perhaps a prospect of an economic corridor connecting India, Middle East and Europe is in the dark at the moment, come to think